Good evening, welcome to Lateline. I'm Tony Jones. On Monday morning, Julia Gillard will call a vote she claims must settle the Labor leadership question once and for all. But will the vitriol that her supporters have heaped on Kevin Rudd in the past 2 days poison her government? And does it virtually guarantee yet another Rudd challenge should the first one fail? Well, shortly we'll be joined live by key Gillard loyalist, the Defence Minister Stephen Smith. And you can join the Twitter conversation with the Age's political editor Michelle Grattan at #Lateline. First, our other headlines. Christmas Island's rescue capabilities criticised by the coroner who investigated the 2010 asylum boat tragedy. France accuses Syrian authorities over the death of a French photographer and demands an explanation. And 49 killed and hundreds injured in a commuter train crash in Buenos Aires. Well, in just a few hours, Kevin Rudd will arrive back in the country and Labor's bloody, bizarre leadership battle will enter a new phase. Head-to-head confrontation between the Prime Minister and her challenger. With each side questioning the other's loyalty and trustworthiness, the eventual winner may end up presiding over a party beyond repair. Political correspondent Tom Ingleton reports from Canberra.
The leadership contest claimed its first casualty.
Get off! Come forward! Come forward!
The cameraman, swept up in the intensity of the battle, got too close to Julia Gillard's motorcade. Damage to Labor reputations mightn't be as easy to heal.
Well, the 2010 election was sabotage. We went into that election in very difficult circumstances as a result of the months of paralysis and chaos under Mr Rudd's leadership.
Kevin Rudd had contempt for the Cabinet, contempt for the Cabinet members, contempt for the caucus, contempt for the Parliament. And ultimately what brought him down a year or two ago was the Australian public worked out that he had contempt for them as well.
It is not acceptable for some members of our caucus to go behind the backs of Cabinet members, behind the backs of caucus colleagues, and to encourage campaigns against other caucus colleagues.
Kevin Rudd's opponents say they're being driven by his long-running guerrilla campaign against the Prime Minister, but it's Mr Rudd now claiming the high moral ground.
I do not believe that these sorts of vicious personal attacks have a place in our national political life. We all have a responsibility to preserve the fabric of decency in our national political institutions.
Kevin Rudd led the Labor Party to victory in 2007 in very difficult circumstances. He's a former party leader and he deserves to have his legacy respected.
Mr Rudd chose his words to attack Julia Gillard more carefully, but they were designed to have much the same effect.
This question of the future of the leadership of our party and our country is not about personality. It's about trust. It's also about policy. Experience and competence and discipline will be needed in terms of our national economic management.
But Julia Gillard says Mr Rudd's achievements were due as much to her, and she was forced to move against him when he refused to change his management style.
I was doing everything I could as Deputy Prime Minister to get the government functioning, and I'm not.
How do people believe you?
Well, I've just told you the truth.
That will resonate with many in caucus when they come to vote on Monday, but so too will Mr Rudd's central pitch.
I do not believe that Prime Minister Gillard can lead the Australian Labor Party to success in the next election. That is a deep belief. I believe it's also a view shared right across the Australian community.
I believe I can lead Labor to that victory, provided that the Labor Party unites and we get on with the job. But I also want to be very clear about this. Government is about more than electioneering.
And I think we need to get out of this idea that Kevin is a messiah who will deliver an election back to us. That is just, I think, fanciful.
While the Prime Minister deployed her cabinet loyalists in tactical strikes against Mr Rudd,
I'm immensely proud of him.
He in turn turned to his most loyal ally.
The Australian people are sick of seeing this kind of undermining and negative backgrounding about him, and that's just gone on and on. I have seen some of the things that have been said in the last 24 hours, and I guess I'd say that I actually know what the truth is. I think the Australian people know what the truth is.
The Rudds are appealing to Labor supporters to send messages of support for the former Prime Minister to their local branches.
What ordinary people tell me is that they trust Kevin and they respect him.
Julia Gillard's support in the ministry is solid, with some exceptions.
I will vote for Kevin Rudd as the Prime Minister of Australia.
I most certainly will be supporting Kevin Rudd.
I'm not going to be intimidated. There's been all sorts of threats made.
Mr Rudd's best chance on Monday is to win over the backbench.
I don't know if he's got 40 votes or whether he's got 140.
Many are continuing to hedge their bets in public.
Have you made a decision about which way you will vote?
No, I usually support the leader, and that's my intention at this stage, and I wouldn't see any reason why not to. But I'll talk to people and take counsel.
The best decision would be a Prime Minister who can win an election against Mr Abbott.
Julia Gillard's second media appearance today was with two backbench supporters of her own.
Yep, you've got to do that, don't you?
Yeah, that's it.
The Prime Minister's doing her utmost to project an image of a leader getting on with the job.
There must be a trick to it.
With the backing of a loyal caucus.
Thank you. Thank you. Yep, Monday morning. See you Monday.
But from tomorrow, the Prime Minister's media advantage disappears. The long-distance war that's been raging over the Pacific will give way to close-quarters combat tomorrow when Kevin Rudd arrives back in his hometown of Brisbane. Even the Prime Minister acknowledged today he's a formidable campaigner. He'll no doubt take full advantage of the media frenzy that will greet his arrival. Tom Eagleton, Lateline.
When the Labor caucus meets on Monday, its 103 members will no doubt have the latest polling in mind, especially the figures comparing how Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd stack up against each other as preferred Prime Minister, and whether new polling shows if either of them could take Labor to victory against Tony Abbott. Kerry Brewster reports.
It's a busy time for pollsters, including Newspolls' Martin O'Shannessy, whose team is gathering the views of 1,200 voters ahead of Monday's crucial caucus meeting. He says a leadership change is the medicine that failed in New South Wales.
I think they face a challenge, which is if they do this and make one more mistake, they may well have really put the seal on their fate. It's a pretty risky strategy.
Despite a slight recovery in December, Prime Minister Julia Gillard and her minority government have suffered a long, debilitating slump in the polls. According to Newspoll, Gillard took Labor to an all-time low of 26% in the primary vote last September. Its most recent polling shows her in better shape, but still deep in negative territory.
Well, she's about as popular as Tony Abbott. 33% of people are satisfied with her performance, about 57% dissatisfied. So she's quite deeply in negative territory on people satisfied with her performance. And I hasten to add, so is Tony Abbott.
So on the current figures, would she be voted back in as Prime Minister?
No, her government would lose and the coalition would have a 30-odd seat majority.
Several senior Labor ministers have stated their preference for Julia Gillard, describing Kevin Rudd as chaotic, dysfunctional and demeaning to his colleagues. But Kevin Rudd's supporters are using the result of last September's Newspoll, when 57% of those surveyed said Kevin Rudd would make a better Prime Minister than Julia Gillard.
I imagine that that's part of the narrative they're putting about. And I imagine that they're also saying that the two-party vote for Kevin Rudd when he was deposed was 52%, which would have given them a nice little majority of about 16 or 18 seats. You have to ask yourself, though, given that he'd burned over 8% of primary vote since the election and had taken the Labor Party into new territory of 35% of primary vote, whether that fall would have continued if he'd remained. There may be a very good argument that suggests that Kevin Rudd would have led the Labor Party just to exactly where it is now, 35% when he finished, 32% now. That's within the margin of error on the poll.
But Martin O'Shannessy says it's hard to see any Labor leader beating Tony Abbott.
I think that Tony Abbott, with a 45% primary vote, is feeling pretty confident. And, there's going to be change as we head towards the election. But Labor needs to put 10% on their primary vote, even more if they're to rule in their own right. That is a very big ask.
Kerry Brewster, Lateline.